Hello and welcome to the Talk with Akinwunmi. Today we're continuing the topic that we started last episode, titled Bridging the Gap, Parents versus Gen Z Teenagers.
Today we have two special guests who are youth leaders in their church and have extensive experience working with both parents and Gen Z teenagers. Please welcome Toby and Jamila. Thank you for both joining us on today's episode.
Hi
Thanks
guys.
for having us. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Okay, so I divided this into four segments. The first segment is titled Understanding Gen Z. So to start with, I think I'll start with Jamie, since we say ladies first. So to start with, can you describe some key characteristics of Gen Z teenagers? What set them apart from different generations, from the previous generations that we have?
That's a good question. I think I would describe Gen Zers as more open. When I say open, I mean that they are very much thinkers. They think for themselves. They are more open to questioning things without just doing it blindly. They tend to follow what makes them excited, what makes them happy. They don't just go with the flow. They're very much thinking consistently about the reasoning why they are doing the things that they are doing. So I think that's the biggest character trait that I know about Gen Z is, like, for example, with the workforce, for example, they won't just go blindly with rules and regulations. They kind of question authority, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. They figure out the reasoning why they're doing certain things rather than just going with the flow of things.
Okay, thank you very much. Toby, is there anything you have to say?
I think she said most of it, but I would also say they don't settle. Maybe it's not a roundabout way of saying what she said, but they don't settle for things that they're not happy with, which can be good and also bad. I would also say that on the negative side, this might come off a little bit. Essentially, I think they're too in touch with their feelings. Okay, that's not the right way to put it, because there's nothing wrong with in touch with their feelings, but they're too led by their feelings. That's a better way to put it. So yeah, on the negative side of characteristic traits of Gen Z, they're too led by their feelings. On the positive side, they don't settle for something that they're not happy with.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question I have here is, what are some common misconceptions parents have about Gen Z teenagers? Jamie?
I'm just having to think. I think that pretty much what Toby said, in the sense that they're too emotional. Some of the misconceptions as well is that they don't want to work hard for anything, or they're very used to being spoon-fed, so they don't want to think for themselves or think independently. I think that's those are some of the misconceptions that I would say that parents have about Gen Zers.
Okay, thank you. Toby?
Misconceptions. Well, like Jamie said, a lot of people think that they are lazy, but I don't necessarily believe that. I think they just work differently compared to how work was done 10, 15, 20 years ago. Well, I think another misconception that parents have is that they essentially just don't care about their future. A lot of parents think that the Gen Zs they just go with the flow and they just ride the wave, and they don't have a plan or a goal or objectives that they want to achieve, which is not true. Their goals and objectives might be different from what their parents expect or what their parents think, and because of that, they automatically just say, "Okay, it's useless. You're not thinking about your life, you're not prioritizing, etc., etc."
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on, the second segment, challenges faced by parents and teenagers. First question, from your experience, what are the biggest challenges parents face when trying to connect with their Gen Z teenagers? Jamie?
Biggest challenge, I would say, is I think that there's a breakdown of communication often, and that breakdown of communication is based on fear of what they don't understand, and sometimes lack of patience on both ends. I think that, with any two groups of people who are on opposing sides, it's very difficult for people to find common ground if there is no communication or no understanding. I think that parents struggle when they don't, like I said before, when they don't understand why a Gen Zer thinks in the way they think, and Gen Zers struggle because they don't understand why their parents think in the way they think, why they just go along with the flow, why they don't question authority, why they don't question why they do what they do. And I think from both ends, there's sometimes resentment in the sense of, why can't you just do what you're told? And the other one on the other side is, why can't we just be, why can't you just think differently? Why can't you just question everything around you? And I think that when both sides are so starkly different, it's often hard to find a common ground. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And then I think to time with what Jamie said earlier on, we talked about feelings. The reason why they don't connect, or another reason why they find it difficult to connect, is because, like I said, the Gen Zs are very emotionally led, right? And their parents are very what's it called, or the opposite of that. They don't do things based on their emotions. They do things for the greater good. So a Gen Z will not settle if they're in a relationship, for example, where they're not happy. Are they called boomers? I'm not sure what the terminology is, but
boomers.
A boomer would have said, especially a parent, for example, said, I stayed in the marriage, even though I didn't love it, for you, right? To make sure that you had a good home and all that kind of stuff. And the child will essentially say, but I didn't tell you to. So I'm not saying that they actually physically say that, but in their minds, they're like, you shouldn't have stayed if you didn't enjoy that marriage, or if you didn't enjoy that circumstance that you were in. So it is, like Jamie said, they're very, very different opposites. And the problem is the boomer, or at least what the boomer has created, that has taught the Gen Z to behave and think that way. So it's weird. It's very weird. You've brought me into the world. You told me to do this, told me to do that, and now when I'm doing it, it's completely opposite of what you want me to do. So that's one of the main reasons why they don't connect, because the Gen Z is very feelings led and won't settle and won't do things that they don't want to do. But the boomer, i.e. their parents, want them to do things that they're not happy about, or they're not okay doing, or they're not happy doing, and that's where the conflict begins.
Okay, that's a very valid point. Thank you, Toby. Okay, I'll go to role of technology and social media. How has technology and social media impacted the parent-teenager dynamic, and what can parents do to understand and manage their teenagers' use of technology? Jamie?
Do you want me to go first, James?
I'm trying to understand what you mean, because there's so many different points that could be made. I think that social media is definitely been a fantastic introduction into society, but it also comes with its downfalls, right? I think social media has given Gen Zs and everyone access to so much information that at times it's like information overload. And I would say that when there's information overload, there's a tendency to think that you understand things more than you do. Just because access to information has a tendency to give to be weaponized in a good way, and to be weaponized by anyone. So for example, having a few minute clip into a certain situation makes you think that you understand it, when there's so many more nuances, there's so much more complications into any topic. But when you kind of have a snippet into a topic, you kind of think, oh, I understand it without really understanding it. I hope that makes sense. So I think that with young people, understanding that information isn't necessarily understanding. Information and understanding are very different things. And I think that the dynamics between parents and Gen Zs is that parents are struggling to limit the kind of information that their children have access to. And it's difficult to control that because there is so much out there. Even as adults, there's so much that we try not to look at, and we try not to have access to, but because of the internet's wide-reaching power, we are constantly being given so much stuff. So I think that the breakdown between parents and Gen Zs is trying to get them to understand that not everything's real. For example, the lifestyles that people are living on the internet isn't necessarily real. For example, the money that people are flaunting on the internet is not really real. The bodies that people are showing on the internet isn't necessarily real. Just because, people like, let's say, the Sidemen and Beta Squad are living a particular lifestyle doesn't mean that this is the lifestyle that you can live instantly if you don't work hard. I think that there's like this delusion based on socials and based on the internet that young people sometimes get sucked into, and it's difficult for parents to let their children understand that there's still hard work, like we've been speaking about already. There's still hard work that needs to be taken into account. There's still, you doing your due diligence as a young person. There's still things that your parents need to protect you from, and you need to understand that your parents have your best interest at heart. They're not trying to take away your freedom just because at times. So yeah.
Sorry, Aki, can you repeat the question for me? I think Jamie answered half of it, but I think there's another half that you were trying to get at.
The first part is how has technology and social media impacted the parenting dynamic? And second part is what can parents do to better understand and manage their teens' use of technology?
Okay, I think Jamie kind of answered the first one in terms of how has it impacted the dynamic. I think the first things parents need to understand to try and fix it is their way of life and how they lived is not different. It's different from how these guys are living. Even my way of life and how I lived is different from how these Gen Zs are living. We had access to Sony Ericsson and Nokia flip phones and all those things. And as I was getting older, maybe like Facebook was coming out and things along those lines, but it's not what it is today. So as a parent, you can't, the same ways that you were taught, the same ways that you were brought up cannot work in this generation. So you have to just leave those thought processes behind, leave those mechanisms and way of thinking behind, and come as a blank slate and try and actually figure out what works in this generation. So, for example, when I was growing up, or when my dad was growing up, he would get beat up, as in he would get spanked by his by his parent. But when I was growing up, he started to change and do things like take away my Xbox from me for a week, because that would hurt a lot more than getting punished or getting put in a corner or whatever it is. So he knew what mattered to me, and he was able to use that to get to teach me a lesson. And I think it's the same way with this generation. The best way for you to understand and the use of technology is also for you to actually understand the technology, right? Understand the good and the bad of what Instagram could do. Understand the good and the bad of what Snapchat can do. Understand the good and the bad of what YouTube can do, because YouTube is a fantastic source of education and learning, but it's also a waste of time if you're sucked in. You can be on what are those things called YouTube Shorts for hours on end instead of studying, and you tell your parents that you're studying. So there are many different ways that and tools that parents can use to monitor their children. I know some kids, some families that I know, they have a thing where all phones automatically shut off at 9 o'clock, no matter where you are, because you're on this network. The phone shut off. So if you're in a room, if you're downstairs, at least that way they can ensure that there's nothing for you to do, or the Wi-Fi automatically goes off in the house at a particular time. So understanding the technology first of all, and then understanding how the benefits and the drawbacks, that would essentially help them understand how to get the best out of it on behalf of their kids.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another segment is bridging the gap. That's what we're going to.
Sorry, can I just add something to what Toby said? I don't necessarily believe that it has to be a complete changing of the patterns in which parents have done things from before. I think a readjustment would probably be more of an apt word. Readjusting it to fit the times. Obviously we're as a
No,
whole.
but then remember, this is technology. So
Yeah,
so
well,
they didn't have that.
I know what you mean, but you said about you using the reference about being parents beating their children versus taking their Xbox away, right? So I'm saying
because that worked best for me at that point in time. So it was still punishment. Obviously, I didn't say don't stop punishment, but my dad realized that the way of he was punished was different than worked for me.
I understand. What I'm saying is that would be termed as a readjustment rather than a whole change. And I think that the point I'm trying to make is that as a whole, society has come into terms with the fact that we have to be a lot more emotionally intelligent and figure out ways in which we can connect with our young people, because the reality is that technology is needed, like you said, is needed across the board. So I think that educating them on the healthy versus the unhealthy, the healthy versus unhealthy relationships with technology, right? And I think that the reason I say that is because you can take someone's phone away and take someone's Xbox away and them think, okay, you're just punishing me. But I think having the conversation, and this is why I talk about emotional intelligence, having the conversation about why they need to have those things away, and not necessarily even just for punishment reasons, but even having time with family. I remember growing up, my mom made a conscious effort and said that, look, we're not going to have TVs in our rooms, because she wanted to make sure that we as a family always spent quality time together. And I think having those, forks in the road as parents makes your children, aware of the fact that there's life outside the online world, and gives them critical skills that they need in society. For example, I was watching an Instagram video, ironically, and a young mom was talking about her son, and she was saying that she just decided to take her son away from all screens, and she noticed the difference, and he was a little bit less whiny and a little bit less demanding, and he was beginning to use his imagination more. And I think that having those conversations and having those little bits within your day, so it's not necessarily seen as a punishment, it's seen as, okay, I'm expanding my horizon, I'm expanding my critical thinking skills, I'm learning how to work with my actual brain and not rely on artificial intelligence, not rely on spell check, for example, just things like that.
Thank you, Jami. The next segment is bridging the gap. I think I have about 3 questions here. So the first question is, how can parents build better relationships with their Generation Z teenagers?
I think we've kind of partially answered this. Being more emotionally intelligent, like Jami just said, because like we said earlier, the Gen Zs are very emotion-led, feelings-led. So if you want to understand, you have to get to their level and get to how they think. And the best way to do that is be emotionally available yourself. A lot of, especially African parents, are not just Southern African parents, just the older generation are very closed off emotionally. Men especially. So, and one thing that I love about my dad, he was never that. He told us everything. He communicated when things were going well, when things were not going well. So I think the first one would be to reach their level, to understand them, would be to, like Jamie said, become more open emotionally and emotionally intelligent.
I think creating time for correct connection is important. The reason I say that is because there tends to be this, like I said in the beginning, there tends to be this illusion that the Generation Z are hard to communicate with, and I don't believe that's true. I don't think they believe that's true. I think that they just need understanding like anyone else, and I think that creating time to understand them is everyone's responsibility, is every parent's responsibility, and taking the time to kind of figure out, okay, what do you like as an individual? What don't you like as an individual? Obviously, we can do certain things with respect on both ends. So when I say respect on both ends, I think parents having respect for their young people, and young people having respect for their parents, most importantly. But I think communicating and trying to understand one another. I think one of the things that as parents we try to do, or parents try to do, is they tend to, especially in the younger years, create this illusion that you can't necessarily understand your parents, or you can't necessarily know what they're thinking. But if you kind of break down those barriers, a lot of the time children do appreciate it, young people do appreciate it. Like if you're, like Toby was saying, vulnerability is such a positive thing, and when you're vulnerable with your young people, there's that connection created. So I would say just having that time to communicate, having that time to learn about your young people, and giving that vulnerability element.
Vulnerability is actually a fantastic building block, but a lot of parents think that it's not the job of the child to stress on their behalf, right? And I understand that. There was a video I watched the other day where, as soon as the girl can sense when her mom, like this daughter and her mom, she can sense when her mom is getting a little bit stressed, and she automatically comes to the rescue. I don't know what kind of twin telepathy that they have as mother and daughter, but this girl can sense it. So as soon as something happens in the other room or in the kitchen, you see the girl just popping around the corner and give her mom a hug, or do something that will just calm her down a little bit. And I don't know whether it's been something that they've worked on or she's spoken about it before, but Jamie's right. Vulnerability and your children understanding that you are humans too, and their action can lead to stress on your part, is a very, very good building block. But at the same time, I understand where parents come from, because you think you're the adult, because of the way you were raised, you have to shield that child and protect that child and not let it experience stress. But the thing is, children, and especially at the younger age, they let go of stress a lot easier than we do. They forgive a lot easier than we do. They don't stress as much as we do. So when they see stress, we think, oh, we're going to scar them. They will forget that stress in 2 seconds and go and play outside with their friends. But we will carry on to that stress and hold on to it forever. But sometimes it's easier to just let it go on them, and they let it go and they move on. So yeah, I agree with Jamie. Vulnerability is definitely a massive building block.
Thank you. Next question. Are there any activities or programs within the church that have successfully brought parents and teenagers closer together?
Within our church or church in general?
Church in general, actually.
I'm not sure, actually. And that's a fantastic opportunity there. Jamie, what about you in your previous churches? Is that anything that they've done?
We have had forums in which, it's like a seating down situation in which parents and children kind of air out their grievances or air out their issues. And, there's a mediator from both sides who kind of brings up the discussed issues that both sides have. I think, excuse me, I think it's really important to be able to have those conversations. I think that we've done it in His Fullness, and I've done it in my church in Destiny as well, in which children and young people come and speak about the issues that they're facing with their parents anonymously, obviously, because we're very aware of protecting identities and protecting household situations. And they come and they just write down the issues that they're facing, the challenges that they're facing, and parents can come as well and speak about the issues that they're facing, and experts on, and mediators can say, this is what we think you should do, this is how we think that you should handle it, and trying to keeping that element of fairness, so it's not, boding on one side of the teenagers and not boding on the other side of the adults. And I think that it's a good way to kind of see and understand from a general perspective where children's grievances are and where parents' grievances are.
And to be fair, I completely forgot the open mic night we did at church. But another thing that we could do, this hasn't been done yet, but it just came to mind immediately as you asked the question. Within businesses and organizations and companies, they have team building days, right? Team building exercises. And I think as a church, we should actually organize that, where essentially families with older children, their parents, they come together, and they essentially do like a competition to see the top three. Obviously, do activities together, so that will essentially help them develop their communication skills, help them bond as a family, and hopefully help them win some sort of prize that they can remember for the rest of their days. So, whether this can be done in church or outside of church, by or what's called certified team bonding experts, I don't know, but I think it's something that we should actually think about.
Yeah, I feel like that would foster good relationship between parents and teenagers, because a lot of parents don't really understand what teenagers are going through these days. Like, I feel like they still think they're still like children, or they're trying to raise us in the manner that they were raised in. And I feel like what works then doesn't necessarily work now. I mean, some parts can work, like discipline and talking to, but the other parts, like it being forceful or taking a military approach, is not going to work.
And some parents, some parents also don't realize how smart their teenagers are. So, and that these bonding exercises can be a way for them to see, oh wow, my kid is actually really intelligent, really good at problem solving, things along those lines. Go, Joe.
I was gonna actually say that I think that having role play exercises work in terms of speaking from the perspective of the parents. Speaking from the perspective of I don't know if any of you have ever seen, in therapy sessions where you respond to different situations so that the young people will respond to certain situations as their parent would, and that the parents would respond in different situations as their young people would. And I think that it could be beneficial, obviously done within the confines of having someone there, as in like having like someone who's a trained therapist or someone who's a trained counselor in the room, and having different scenarios in which your young people respond as you and you respond as your young people. I think having that would be helpful, and then not just having it, but then asking your young person why they responded in that way, and asking your parent why they responded in that way will kind of give you an understanding why they think that you would respond in that way, and vice versa, would give them an understanding as to where their heads are and why they are the way they are. Because one of the things that happens with individuals is that people often don't understand the reasoning behind they don't understand why people think the way they think. So I think that these kind of things will help. So for example, parents might not give certain pieces of information because they want to protect their child, and a child might respond to a scenario by saying, "Oh, mommy doesn't ever tell." Mommy doesn't, in a way that suggests that mommy never tells us anything, and the parents can see that from the response that the child gives, and it gives insight to the parents from the perspective of the child, that they feel like the parents never share pieces of information, and because of that, you break down a wall, and you make the child understand that actually the only reason I don't tell you this is because I don't want to burden you. And like Toby said already, it's possible that a child can be like, "Oh, I understand that you don't want to burden me, but I worry about you anyway." And that automatically can give both people a newfound sense of respect for one another, a newfound sense of, oh, the only reason they react this way is because they don't feel included, or the only reason they react this way is because they don't feel like I respect their opinion. The only reason they react this way is whatever reason, but ultimately the reality will be because you have another person's perspective. Sometimes we don't think about other people's perspectives. We only see on the perception of what we see. So I think that that'd be a good way to kind of get people together.
Thank you very much, Jami. Okay, last segment is communication tips. First question under that segment is, how can teenagers express themselves in a way that their parents will understand and respect?
This is a very difficult one, because the thing about adults, right? They have set ways. So from when they're brought up, unless they are very self-aware and are always trying to be better, which most people aren't, they have their set actions, their set thought processes, their set reactions all the time. I can give you an example. Clockwork. Every day, my dad will come back from work. If the house is messy, doesn't matter who it is in the living room, doesn't matter if you just come back from school, doesn't matter anything, you're getting shouted at. Why is the house so dirty? Blah, 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 blah. So parents and adults in general are set in their ways. And it's difficult for a child to change the mind of a parent, or to change the biological makeup of a parent, or to change their past experiences that has gotten them into that place. So your question is, how can a child help that communication, or how can the teenager help that? It's very, very difficult. You have to first of all have a parent who is willing to and open to listen, willing to adapt, willing to change, and hopefully if you don't have that, you can bring third-party people into the mix. So for example, your youth leaders at church, or maybe it's one parent that's not listening. You told the other parent to try and be the mitigator in a respectful way, etc., etc. But if you do have a parent or parents who are willing to learn and willing to change, then it's just being patient with them and respectfully telling them how you feel, and also understanding that it's not going to get solved overnight. That even if they say they're going to try, they're still going to fall back on their normal behavior every now and then, and just give them a bit of allowance, a bit of patience for them to essentially adapt to how you want them to behave. I hope that answered that question. Do you have anything? Jamila.
Hello, sorry, I was speaking. I said, can you repeat the question again, Aki?
Okay, how can teenagers express themselves in a way that parents will understand and respect?
I think you need to know your parent. The reason I say that is because it's very important to know the person that you are I don't want to say opposing. Know the person that you're dealing with. So for example, if you know that your parents, when they come back from work, is not likely to respond to being bombarded with questions because they've had a long day, it would make more sense for you to reach out to them on a day that they are calmer and have a conversation with them, letting them know, hey, can we have a chat about this? I think that if you know that your parent is someone who is receptive in the sense of, oh, you can have a talk with them, you should approach them in a way that you have seen them respond to previously. Another thing is, if you know that your parent isn't someone who is who would receive things well, like Toby said, having a third party that they would respond to is important. Especially an authority figure, especially in the Christian context, like let's say a pastor. I know that parents especially African parents, are very big on they don't want to be embarrassed, they don't want to be shamed, etc. So it might be difficult for young people to include a third party in the situation. But I think that it's so important not to suffer in silence, especially if the situation is getting to a place that is unbearable. You have to get to a point where you decide whether your mental health and your situation is worth being addressed over, what your parents can possibly say to you. It's like with a marriage as well. Like, if you're in a marriage that, someone is hurting another person emotionally or whatever, and you feel like there's no one for you to talk to, it's better for you to reach out to your pastor than for you to suffer in silence and think that, oh, when I get home, it might be hell on earth. It's better than the situation that you're currently in. So I would encourage all young people that if they feel that, their parents aren't people that can be reached out to in the way that they want them to be reached out to, getting someone involved, like your pastor or someone that your parents respect, would be really helpful. And your pastor and the person that you get involved will obviously use wisdom to make sure that you're not put in harm's way. You're not put in a position where your parent is like, okay, wait till we get home, I'll show you Pepper, kind of thing. They're going to put you in a situation where they know that your parents will use wisdom. Your parents will respond wisely, essentially. So I would suggest those two things.
Thank you very much, Jamie and Toby. Before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or key takeaways for our listeners?
For me, it would just be, as a teenager, if you're listening to this, just be patient with your parents. Like I said, they have 30, 40, 50, 60 years of ways that they've developed, and there's a lot of the time they're set in those ways. So you have to be patient with them and give them a little bit of leeway. And on the same side, if you are a parent, you have to be open to change. You have to be somebody who's self-aware, or at least try to be self-aware, and understand that what worked, like you said, Aki, what worked 20, 30 years ago when you were growing up cannot work now. The world is completely different. Technology is completely different. The what we're exposed to, the information we're exposed to is completely different. So you just have to bear that in mind, that you can't always use what you've been taught in the past. A lot of the time you can't use what you're taught in the past. You have to be ready to relearn and adapt to the changing environment that we're currently in.
Shami, do you have any thoughts?
I think for me, understanding that you can't have for either side, you can't have anyone's full perspective if you're not willing to put yourself in their shoes on both sides. I think that parents need to put themselves in the shoes of young people and understanding that the world is consistently changing and it's a new world, and they're just trying to understand it and navigate it. And as parents, you've been here for a longer time, and you have a little bit more experience. So understanding that young people are just trying to figure things out will go a long way in the way that you respond to them. And then for young people, understanding that, again, parents have experience, and just because you have access to information doesn't mean that you know everything. With those two things in mind, trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and try and understand why they are reacting in the way that they're reacting really does help. And also just ultimately knowing that most of the time the responses is never out of, your children love you and then your parents love you as well. It's just sometimes based on emotional stimulation and based on, the heat of the moment, people might act out of character. But ultimately having that understanding that there is love there and coming from a place of love is really, really important. Yeah, that's all I was going to say.
Thank you very much, Toby and Jami, for sharing your insights and experiences today with our listeners. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in for today's episode. See you next time.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for having us, Aki.
Thanks for having us. Bye. Bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye.